Yeah, let's get started. So first, I'm just going to do a really quick introduction. Hi, I'm Jen Kotler. I am a UX designer at Space Telescope Science Institute. And I'm not going to be doing most of the talking today, but I'm one of the organizers, and we've been working on a grant focused on improving Jupyter Notebook accessibility. And you'll learn a bit more about that today. And I just want to say that this project is this hackathon is part of that larger project. And we're really excited to have you all, and we're hoping to make a lot of improvements in that area. And we hope you learn something. So with that, I'll leave it to Patrick to introduce this today.
Thanks, Jen. So my name is Patrick Smith. I'm chief learner at Iota School. And I'll talk a little bit more about my background and why I'm so interested in this topic in a second. I wanted to give a quick definition and overview of accessibility and some of the larger considerations or concerns that we have in this area, specifically in STEM, in the sciences. My definition of accessibility, you're going to find a ton of different definitions of accessibility, but my definition is that it's the theory, practice, and the daily reality of designing for people with the widest possible selection of capabilities, range of capabilities, and with special consideration often given to people with disabilities. And often what we talk about when we talk about accessibility is this other related concept called universal design. And that really, the short version of that is really that designing for people with disabilities often makes design better for everyone. And the example that people always give are curb cuts, which are those little ramps that you see on the sidewalk that everyone finds so convenient, but that didn't exist before there was a whole movement to sort of get those installed in the 60s and 70s. In STEM, we have some specific accessibility challenges. And those are lately, we're working on, been thinking a lot about this, and I've kind of, in my mind, I've been dividing them into 3 categories, but of course, I'm sure you could divide them into lots of categories. They are physical lab spaces, which are often like in the sciences, have specific accessibility challenges. They are accessible research products or accessible papers, documents, and equations, stuff like that. And then we also have this area of accessibility in tools. And I would say there's specific accessibility challenges for all of these. And today we're sort of going to be more concerned in this area of, it's an interesting combination of the research products or the papers and the tools, because we're going to be looking at the exports from Jupyter Notebooks. So we're going to look at the HTML exports from that specific tool set, which are often a research product and one that Space Telescope Science Institute uses to share a lot of scientific research and teaching. And I'll just say really briefly as a personal note, I am a visually impaired, blind, whatever word you want to use, coder, and teacher and technologist. And I teach actually, I teach here at the City University of New York. And I teach with tools that are actually not accessible for people with my own background. And I found ways to deal with that. But really, I know from personal experience, and also as part of this project that we're working on, Astronomy Notebooks for All, with Space Telescope Science Institute, that the inaccessibility of tools in the sciences, it really does keep people out of STEM. It really does prevent people from moving forward with interesting and lucrative careers in the sciences, in technology, engineering, and mathematics. And in programming too. So I'm going to now turn, we're going to be doing in a little bit a couple of talks that will get you sort of situated, understanding some of the concerns around accessibility in notebooks from my colleague Tony Fast and Isabela Presedo-Floyd. And in about an hour, about noon, we're going to start an activity or an exercise where we're actually going to start applying these things. So I'm going to turn things over to Tony Fast.
Cool. So I'm actually going to jump in and give a presentation from a notebook. Gonna swap here and then bounce over to my blog. I use Jupyter Notebooks on the daily. I use them for blog posts and I use them for presentations. So I'll share a link to this. There should be some links to this somewhere in the resources. But all of y'all are able to do this. So if you don't have access to Jupyter, some of these links will get you there. But what I really wanted to do, since all of us have lived a shared experience, and we're kind of stuck in the now, I wanted to pull back the curtains of history a little bit and fly through and figure out why we're here. I really think in open source history is super important in understanding our science and software and the things that are inside of it. So what we're going to do in this talk is we're going to start in the late 60s at the dawn of postmodernity. We're going to run through the pre-web and the modern web, and we're going to land in this inaccessible pandemic hellscape that manufactures disability that we're in now, and try and understand how notebooks are important in this larger context of history. I just need to do some cleaning here. I'm going to run everything, and then, so this is a notebook, it runs, I'm giving a presentation in it, and now we're ready to go. So Project Jupyter is an award-winning project. We'll talk about the award a little bit later on, but from their website, they're free software built on open standards. They use web services for interactive computing in all programming languages. That's the really important thing. Jupyter is not bound to Python, it's not bound to Julia or R. It can do Fortran, it can do a lot of different things. Mostly we find Python and Markdown, but what it really does is it lets us read and write code in many languages. So I'm going to talk about how we got to this, and you're going to follow me through the olds so we can do that. So I think it's like important to go back to the first, the place where history was indelibly changed forever. And I think that for us in computing, one of the places where that is the Xerox Alto. But since I'm a scientist and I only can start from first principles, I know what this mouse is and it hasn't been invented yet, so we got to go back further in time. And there was a guy named Doug Engelbart who changed the way that we work on computers. This is actually a prototype of the first mouse, 1967, and the mouse was called the XY position indicator for a display system. Thank God we got mouse, it's a little bit shorter, but what's the plural of it? I still don't know. So Doug Engelbart changed our lives at the end of 1968 when he gave the mother of all demos. This mother of all demos was the first time that we saw graphical user interfaces, windows, hypertext, navigation, video conferencing, the mouse, word processing, files, revision control, real-time collaboration. This was in the late 60s. And basically we've been spending the rest of our life trying to recreate Doug Engelbart's demo in a way that's shinier and fancier, not necessarily accessible. But now that we have the mouse and we have Doug Engelbart's contributions, this really influenced the Alto, that computer that we referenced before the mouse. The Alto was the first concept of a computer created at Xerox PARC, and it was our glimpse into the modern personal workstation. And this diagram here shows Alto's influence across the world. We can track the email back to Alto, we can track Python and Smalltalk and object-oriented programming and Apple and all kinds of things back to the Alto. And at the time, Xerox PARC was just a burgeoning resource facility that gave us a lot of what we have today. They did not give us the notebook interface, though. The notebook interface was actually the brainchild of Theodore Gray, and it was inspired it was actually worked on at Apple. Eventually, Gray brought this to Mathematica, Stephen Wolfram's company, and the design was further refined by Steve Jobs. So the notebook was originally designed to turn scientific programming into an interactive exercise where things can be tweaked and reran. And the scientists bit onto this really passionately, but the mathematical language wasn't the hit. So in the late 90s, there was a essay that came out called Computer Programming for Everybody. And this is the DARPA proposal that funded the early development of Python, right? So they reference in the beginning Xerox PARC saying, can we have a computer on every desk, which is influenced by the Alto, right? And the goal of every computer on every desk is the mass ability to read and write software for mass literacy and mass computer education, right? So, you know, Python starts to hit this language stride that other things didn't hit before. But it wasn't fluid enough. It didn't have that interactivity that scientists need. And in 2001, Fernando Perez, the creator of IPython, posted to the message board about a new interactive shell. And as a graduate student, he was specifically designing this for himself as a scientist. So the IPython project was the necessary seed for Jupyter to split off in 2015 and become Project Jupyter as we know it. The name Jupyter is an amalgam of Julia, Python, and R, which is kind of how you can see the name. And it also hints back to Galileo's early drawings and investigations. So now we're in this late place where we can write in any language, and Jupyter is the tool for that. And I'm a huge Jupyter fan. And over the years, a lot of people have unduly talked negatively on Jupyter. But the thing that always got to me was they're acknowledged with this ACM Software System Award. This is a huge acknowledgement. It acknowledges Jupyter as a critical software system. And the concepts behind it and the tools behind it and the way that it's developed make it an important tool for the future. Now, with this award, Project Jupyter in 2017, with a bunch of folks that that work on the technology that we're using today, are now in company with things like the Alto, Unix, Tech, Smalltalk, right? I'm trying to make the case here that Jupyter is really an important piece of software. And when we think negatively of it, we're kind of neglecting the bigger, broader impacts of it. And Jupyter isn't the only tool in town either. Depending upon what language you use or what systems you prefer, there are free and open source solutions. There are proprietary solutions. And there are a lot of different options for people to compute in notebooks, with the ultimate goal being that interactive conversation with a computer about your science. At this point, there's over 10 million notebooks on at least 10 million notebooks online. People can do large scale studies. So a lot of this talk, if you go back to it, has some great links that you can take and explore yourself. I hope you get a chance to do that. But what we're really talking about here is this formal structure, these common forms of the notebook and cells. One place that's pushing this area on the web is Observable. So the thing that overlaps all of these is not necessarily the notebook. It's the fact that most of them are on the web and they're inaccessible. So using the timeline that we have, that we've set up so far, web content accessibility guidelines, the guidelines to make the experience for disabled people on the internet better didn't come until much later in some of these advances in timelines. In fact, 2018 is when we got WCAG 2.1. So that's fairly recent, and we're still trying to standardize changing standards. So at this point, with Jupyter notebooks specifically, there was, and through our advocacy work in accessibility, Jupyter now is actually passing at the web content or accessibility audits. It does not have any automatic issues anymore. This means that maybe it is okay in regulatory situations, but it's not necessarily empowering folks. Automated testing is a practice in accessibility, and the industry standard is ACTS Core, but there's a caveat here where it only catches about 50 or 60% of the issues, which means that we need other solutions outside of automated testing. If you do want to try some automated testing today, you can install the Firefox Axe extension or Chrome extension, and that'll help get you started here. But what our project has really been focused on is manual testing and the incredible work that Isabela and Jen have done. It's just absolutely remarkable, the work that they have done to bring disabled users into the process and have them be heard. We found out so much more from talking to people and listening to people, and you can find these results on our GitHub. But it's just remarkable work, and it gives us great stuff to build off of. But the trouble that we have here is it's not just on us. We can't make the world accessible for everyone. Y'all have to think about writing accessibly. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to learn to write accessible notebooks, because nobody's going to do that for us. We're going to explore some accessibility resources and learn some language the first time. We're going to, when we move forward, we're going to listen to disabled people. We're going to abide standards. And if this work does suit your fancy, join our Jupyter community accessibility meetings. So yeah, with that, I think I'm going to stop my talk. I hope I was in the right amount of time. I think I had 10 or 12 minutes. 10 minutes, not bad. Maybe I went too fast. Sorry, folks.
That's just more time to hack, Tony. And I have to say, I really enjoy that, but I'm a little nerd for early computer stuff. So thank you. And Isabela?
I'm actually going to let Jen go first to describe our project background. There you go, Jen.
Oh, okay. Can you go to the next slide? So Tony touched on this a bit, but I just want to jump in and go over this project that we've been working on. We keep referencing. We're calling it Notebooks for All, and it's a collaboration between all the folks you've seen so far this morning, and which, you know, Space Telescope Science Institute, Iota School, and Quansight Labs. We have a GitHub, which you definitely should check out later. Basically, our goal is to learn and publicly document where notebook reading and navigation fails disabled users. And we've been doing that through usability testing to try to figure out what the preferred experience, how they should behave, and what we actually want, what would be helpful. Can you go to the next slide? So, like I said, we've been doing that through usability testing, which is when you meet with people one-on-one, and we've written scripts and followed those scripts to go through different aspects of a notebook. So for instance, navigation, different content types, and we see how they behave with screen readers, braille readers, magnification, and just various other forms of assistive technology. And so we do that usability test, we write up the results, and then we turn those results into some tasks, some development tasks that we can bring back into the notebook, how the notebook is exported itself. And then we write another test and we do it again. So it's a bit of an iterative cycle that's circular, and it goes around and around. And the goal is that eventually we'll be able to have fixes that we could push upstream and be incorporated directly into notebooks. We haven't achieved that yet, but it is the thing to look for in the future. I don't know if there's another slide. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Okay. So back to Isabela.
Okay, yes, hello. Yes, so I am Isabela. I did not introduce myself yet. I use she, her pronouns. I look a little bit like a fluffy dog, I think, sometimes a Cocker Spaniel. And I am a designer running a lot of usability testing with Jen, which is awesome. That's one of my favorite things to do. So I'm really happy to be here. And it's been so awesome to be doing a collaborative thing. I love working in open source for that, but it's been super great because sometimes it's hard to coordinate across institutions. So hooray. But what I'm actually going to be spending time with you on today is talking through these authoring tips. You know, Jen was just talking about what we're doing in the project and saying like, okay, we're trying to get some of these fixes happening, but we're also trying to learn, you know, what we can from outside. So we've been able to find a lot of things that are not necessarily like fixes, but instead things we can do. So I have a lot to get through at this 20 minutes. I'm going to try and not go too deep with anyone, so you don't have to hear me talk quite as long. But please feel free to keep your questions. You can put them in the chat. I won't see them right away. But most of these topics I'm going to cover, we could go way deeper into, and I would love to later on. So please don't lose those questions. Cool. So quick note on the notebook formats and kind of accessibility. We've been discussing this whole time that they aren't that accessible. In some cases, they're not, but just to kind of draw some clearer lines with that. The editable notebook format, right, like the actual file, no matter what interface you open it in, is I pretty clearly inaccessible. That's based on like multiple community reviews. really unfortunate, right? But also the truth. I've seen some people be able to work with it and some people not, but it is not your reliable source. The uneditable like read-only notebooks in HTML form get a little better because HTML actually has a lot of built-in accessibility properties. So just in moving it to that language with a little bit more structure for such a thing helps a lot. But, you know, we've been running tests almost exclusively on these HTML exported versions and we still find plenty of issues. But the truth is the content we can totally fix now. And that's what we're going to be doing today, is focusing on what you can do in the actual content of notebooks to make that as best we can without having to wait for the other changes. So this is kind of distilled from feedback. Some of these things are also going to overlap with what Tony mentioned earlier, the web content accessibility guidelines. I'll probably talk about those a lot just because that's who I am as a person at this point in my life. But yeah, I'll be trying to point out a little bit of how that happens in tests too, where I can, so you can get a little more concrete. Breaking it up kind of by type, I'm going to talk about different content types, but I'm also going to start with organization, like some things you can do at the highest level of your notebook to help make it more approachable. So first, giving context right at the beginning. We had this a lot when we would ask people to enter notebooks and they'd be like, you know, where am I? What am I doing? What are you asking me kind of to know? So some of the things that we recommend doing first, probably in a markdown cell at the top, would be having a title, using one H1 that is a pound sign and a space in markdown, but I'll give you a markdown cheat sheet later too, so you can review that more. Having a summary of the notebook, letting people know that they're getting into the thing that they mean to, especially when these things may not be the most accessible. People often are weighing how much time can I afford to spend digging into this thing? Is it what I need? So summaries came up a lot. Table of contents is an ordered list, authors, affiliations, first or date, and time. Why did I say time? Date first published is enough. Also last edited, and a link to the notebook source that came up a ton as well, that, you know, we're working with things that people can edit, but in many cases they can make it work for them much better than we can predict, and having that source is really important. A source could be like the original form of the notebook, the source could be the data set you're working from, the source could be another file that's relevant, so that can be relative, but giving people kind of whatever you drew it from is helpful. You're also going to use Markdown, right? That's one of the awesome things about notebooks, is you don't just have to write the code and then comment in the code, you can actually write around it. The thing though, you do need to use Markdown as intended, right? It's just a step up from HTML. So if you use Markdown the way it's expected, and by that I mean, like, if you're using a list, using it actually as a list and not just a way to add like a pretty sparkle in something, or using the correct number of heading, not skipping them, means that it produces an HTML structure that is much, much more approachable for assistive tech. And that's what you want. You don't want to rework the wheel on your own. So using Markdown is a great way to get started. But also use those headings, right? A lot of people use those for navigation, whether that is visually or otherwise. So don't skip your heading levels. That creates more confusing structure. And consider beginning your Markdown cells with headings. I wouldn't say they all need it, but definitely people like to know kind of what sections they're approaching. Many people are not going to go through the notebook linearly, even if you think they are. We definitely saw that. So it's really great to give people those anchors throughout so they can kind of move as they see fit. This is an example from one of our notebooks. We have a markdown cell here, what not to do. We have a header 1, a header 3, and a header 6 back to back. A lot of people do this for styling reasons. I see people skip header 2s all the time because they don't like the size of it compared to 1. But if you do this, it's going to kind of either show up as like empty gaps, or you're not going to be sure like how the nesting works, because in the end, these headers do get nested. So it is important to do that. If you have styling concerns, you will have to just style them. In the end, that's not what a markup language is for, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know. Cool. Moving on to images. I could spend a lot of time on images, and I'm trying to force myself not to. The main thing I'm going to say here is you need an image description. You may have heard this before as alt text. It's really commonly called that. I will probably use them interchangeably despite my best effort, although really alt text refers to the like HTML element for alt, and image descriptions may not necessarily be that, depending how you bring the image into your notebook. So the important thing you need to do is provide a description of that image as it's relevant to the rest of the content. So that could be very granular, that could be very high level. It depends on what purpose it serves with the rest of your notebook. Whenever possible, use that alt attribute. We can talk about a little more how that appears for different things in our breakout rooms after. Some visualization libraries actually support this too, and you can generate it with an alt embedded in it. Some don't. You're going to have to read the docs in that case and find out. But when in doubt, you can always describe the image in surrounding texts and paragraphs, that sort of thing. And if there is any text inside your image, you need to make sure that that is somewhere else in the description, because otherwise there's no other way to access that text, right? And even in low vision cases, it may not zoom properly. So you really want to be sure. I have so many further resources on image descriptions, so pass that on to me whenever. And yes, once again, just saying alt text does actually refer to an HTML element specifically, but we do use it like colloquially. We use it a lot to describe all image descriptions. In terms of visualizations, right, this is not something guaranteed in notebooks, but it's a pretty common use case, so we did want to cover it, especially since we took the time to test some visualizations. The text in these can be a real pain point, but obviously it's needed, right? Visualizations need these things. So just make sure, like all other text and images, to include that. But there's a few more things I would say you want to have with a visualization. Specifically, you want to make sure to kind of describe first the type of it. So, right, a bar chart, a scatter plot. I'm sure there are many other types you can think of, but give people that big picture first, and then start getting a little more specific, like say, this is the title, these are the labels, this is a key or legend, and then start describing the significance of it to everything else, right? That may be each data point, that may be just a trend line, that may be you can see the difference between in these two time frames, there's twice as much this. So this is really, once again, thinking about how you're using your visualizations. So for example, this was one of the things that we worked with in our testing. We have these two compared plots, which I'm going to be honest, I'm not an astronomer. I'm not entirely clear what these are either. But I know that we had these, and many people could not even tell they were a visualization in the first place because they were not labeled in the notebooks we worked with. But on top of that, you know, they have kind of vague titles. There's no labels on the axes. People really weren't sure what to do with these unless a participant happened to have domain expertise to recognize what's happening in these notebooks. So, and finally, I kind of mentioned it because I implied it in the descriptions, but do label your visualizations. I think this is good hygiene generally, but it does have accessibility impacts. Not having a title, not labeling your axes, not including legends when you should, really doesn't give people much to kind of grab onto when they're trying to understand your message. So not having a title is like my #1 informal offense of when I review people's stuff. It's very, very funny to me. So people do use that, I promise. It'd be great to have it. Finally, colors with visualizations. This is going to apply to colors everywhere, but they need to have good enough contrast. What that means is that the light and dark between them needs to be high enough that they can be perceived. So right with these slides, we have a dark background. We have a very light font on it. It's pretty high contrast, but you know, say if I decided to do a white background slide with yellow text on it, that would be a lot harder to read if you could read it in the first place. There are ratios for this kind of thing that are in contrast checkers that we have further links for. Some other things that will make the perceived contrast lower are like using low opacity, right? Because you're blending with the color in the background. There's less contrast when that happens. Using thin lines, thin fonts, those kind of things, even if they're high contrast, visually starts to get harder to see. We had that with some of the plots use kind of really lightweight fonts, and it was like, oh, I can see there's something there, but I can't really tell what it is. I would always tell people, consider plotting in only black and white first. It doesn't mean don't use color forever, but you know, be really considerate about how you're using it, because you can't guarantee that someone is going to get that information at all. And on that point, you don't want to use color as your only means for conveying information. There's a lot of other ways you can mix it up. You can add, you know, a text label. You can use a mix of a color and a pattern, colors or some kind of other texture. But that's kind of a general accessibility thing, as well as being aware of how many different ways people could need to interact with it and providing them kind of multiple openings. Oh, yeah. Oof, here is another plot that we did test. I really like this one specifically because we had, you know, the axes are higher contrast. They're like pure black on a white background. And so this became less of an issue for people, but the actual plotted lines our lower opacity. And so a lot of people were not really sure what was going on. Some people really had to look closer to see that there was any plotting at all and that it wasn't empty axes. So you do want to be kind of checking throughout the plot with these things. Oh man, I have more visualization info. Wow, lucky you. Finally, you know, we were talking earlier about linking sources. This is really helpful. This was like a big ask in our notebooks because they did not have links to the data source. And a lot of people were like, you can visualize all day long. In the end, I'm going to need to explore it myself to understand, you know, I want access to all the data points. So this became a really important thing. I also know you can sonify certain types of plots. This is something I personally know less about, but I believe Jen knows more about. This would be providing like instead of visualization, right, which relies on visual, what do I want to say, communication of the data, this would be audio or oral with an AU. I can't do this. Audio. We're playing audio for your charts. Yeah. Okay. I promise it gets a little cleaner from here, but here we go with text. I'm not talking about code here. I'm really talking more about the markdown and kind of some style choices that came up. So you want to use descriptive link names. By this, I mean a link that says click here doesn't tell you where you're going, doesn't tell you what you're doing, doesn't really make it clear why you should click here, in fact. Saying something like more resources in the Notebooks for All GitHub repository now tells me, you know, what the project is, where I'll be taken on the internet, you know, is it worth clicking the link and following that? This may also be, a lot of people will navigate by using interactive elements on the page, and links are interactive elements. So they may actually not get the context around the link, even if you line it up in a sentence. They may just get, you know, click here, click here, click here, which is not helpful for them navigating the content. So this does have a bigger impact than you may initially think. I'm also going to ask you to use plain language. This does have kind of a specific meaning in the accessibility space that's larger, but most of the time it's trying to use the most kind of approachable and common words whenever possible for what you're explaining. Now, I get this a lot working with scientific software, you know, what we need to use our terms for the science. Yes, you do. Please keep using domain-specific terms. That is really important, but it's just about being intentional when you need them and when you can, in fact, use something with more plain language. I would also encourage you to use links or define some of those domain-specific terms if you can, because, you know, we saw that with our very different group of participants, like in terms of what knowledge they had. And many of them, right, these are very educated people to be working in this space at all, but they could have gotten help with a little link to be like, oh, that's what they're talking about in this case. I am also going to ask you, you know, review other style guidelines. I know Space Telescope has some of their own. There may be additional things in that. I did link Google's developer documentation style guide simply because that is for more technical language, even if it's not purely scientific. So they have some good pointers if you're like, man, I don't really know how to describe this complicated thing. Yeah. Cool. Time to talk a little bit about code. We had notebooks with a lot of mixed code in them, and one of the common things was that people wanted to kind of know. They wanted to be led into the code cells, similar to wanting to be led into the notebook at all. The code cells in many cases there's not a lot of structure within them, right? They're just kind of blocks. And so giving people something to kind of dig into and understand what they're interacting with is helpful, because depending how they have, what capabilities they have and how they have the tech set up, sometimes we heard them read character by character in these tests. And, you know, that is a much slower way. There's kind of a high bar for some of these people thinking about, do I even want to get into this cell, or am I going to get stuck here for a while? The way that you lead into it can vary. You know, you can label it in a heading above, you know, something that's pretty common, I think, is having an import cell at the top of your notebook. And giving that like a markdown cell before that with a heading for imports lets people know, hey, I do want to know what packages are in this notebook. That would be great. Or, you know, I don't care. I just want to get straight to the content. You do want to tell what the cell should do before it is done. That's the kind of main goal. This could be in the markdown cell before, but for particularly long stretches of code, you may want to comment within the lines. It will be a little harder for people to find, but it can help you guide people along. Syntax highlighting is not always accessible either, right? That's using code to kind of group parts, or using color to kind of group parts of the code. You may not have control over this depending how you're working with your notebook. There is a default one in Jupyter Notebooks that is not entirely accessible. That is being worked on a different project. But in case you do have the option, I have some accessible syntax highlighting themes for you to use with good contrast. And do not list several ways for people to complete the task. Try and focus on the one that's relevant, unless the point of the notebook is to compare. This just came up when we were working with the non-linearity, or the way that people were working with notebooks non-linearly. And sometimes it was like, okay, am I mixing tasks from different places? What is happening? And that was kind of an issue because it can be hard to ground yourself within the code. Just be, at the very least, be clear, but definitely be intentional. So I wanted to show you an example from the NumPy tutorials. That's a set of Jupyter notebooks with tutorials about NumPy features and how to use NumPy. But I really like their documentation team has a review where they kind of do this lead into code. So I wanted to give an example from here. They kind of say, okay, this is what we're going to do in this cell, right? And this is how you're going to do it. You're going to use the saves function. And in fact, we're going to define the things that may not be familiar with you here, right? You'll use two options to label the arrays in the file, the x-axis being x, the y-axis being y. And then we actually go into code cell and we see all this. And now we've pointed out and people can pull this apart, whether it's really familiar to them, they can skim through it, or they can kind of break it apart and understand how they need to use it for their own needs. Finally, I promise we're almost there. Other content types. There are so many things that you can put in a notebook, right? That's another amazing thing about them. You can make all sorts of things. But we were able to test like videos and some things with kind of players, which was really helpful. But I'm going to give you some pointers because even though you can do a lot, right? When you start doing a lot, you start creating a lot of accessibility vulnerabilities for yourself too. But please keep doing the creative things. So one, use titles. I know that's come up a lot, but it was also true here. We had videos without titles and people were like, I have no clue what this is. Am I going to click on it and it's going to be like very abrupt? Is it just music? What is it? Things that are long or complex may benefit from summaries. You don't want anything that can move to flash more than 3 times per second. This is a seizure risk. That's just a big one in general. Don't have things autoplay. You want to give people control over that sort of thing, especially since it can autoplay off screen. People may not find where to deal with that. Anything with visual controls needs to have enough color contrast like we discussed earlier, and it also needs to be labeled. As always, linking to sources for these things becomes really important, especially as you get more creative because we're less sure how to interact with it. Videos, you want to have captions, which would be descriptions in time with the audio, and transcripts, which are paragraph forms. And if anything is needed to understand the rest of the notebook, if you're putting any critical information outside of the text form, like in some kind of widget, in some kind of video, you do need to make sure it's somewhere else. It's just safer because you never know what people are and aren't going to be able to do. That's why I tell people a lot, when in doubt, write it out. Very catchy, also very true. Text is extremely transformable, right? You can read it, you can change the font size, you can zoom in, you can change it to another language, you can make it Braille, you can have it read to you. Text is really good for that. Not to say like, please use the other means. For some people, text is very hard to process, right? But text is always going to be your safe backup. So cool. My quick summaries, and then you will be free from my monologue, would be context and descriptions are relevant no matter what you're working with. The interactive areas need some kind of control. They should not be operating on their own. You want to label them. You want to have good contrast. You want to provide links wherever possible because people may want to dig in ways that you can't expect. Actually use your markdown. It's pretty cool that you can do that actually in a notebook next to all your, code. And finally, make sure what you create is perceivable, operable, and understandable. This is actually abbreviated. It's a section of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but it can be good if you don't really know what you're working with, just trying to check like, okay, can I get all this information out? Can I get all this information if, I start removing something? Can I make sure I can complete all the tasks? Is it operable, if I don't have a mouse? Is it operable if I'm in really bright light and I can't see the things well? And is it understandable? Just trying to make sure like that you can have clarity wherever you can find it. So I think with that, you are free from me. Thank you so much for your patience. I know that was a lot of info, but we wanted to make sure you have it so that you can always refer to these slides later. So Thank you very much. On to Patrick. Prepping
Thank you
to
so much,
hack.
Isabella. That was so amazingly comprehensive. And I just want to reiterate what Tony said, which is that this is not just authoring tips that have come from like a whole lot of accessibility experience, which is obviously also evident, but also specific tests that Jennifer Kotler and Isabella have run at with blind and low vision folks. So these are very like practical advice that comes from actually sitting down with people. So I really appreciate that, and I like to hear it. And when in doubt, write it out. I really like that. All right, so for our next segment, and I will say first off, after I articulate what we're going to do for this, we're going to take a quick break so you can kind of psychologically prepare yourself for that. We are going to do a little exercise, and it's going to be an evaluation of a HTML export from a Jupyter notebook. The exercise comes in 3 steps. So first of all, I'll explain that we're going to go into smaller breakout rooms that will each have a facilitator in them. And if you have any issues or questions during your time hacking in the next hour or so, then reach out, speak to your facilitator. You can message them or you can speak with them, and they have a direct line to us, the organizers of the event. The 3 steps that we're going to be taking once we get into the breakout rooms are: first, we're going to choose a notebook. And I will say off the top, we have some default options for you. So we have 2 notebooks. We have one on Galaxy mergers, and we have one on the ASDF data format. Don't worry too much about the content. If you're not a domain expert in astronomy, these are astronomy notebooks, but if you're not a domain expert in astronomy, it shouldn't be a problem. You're evaluating the notebook based on some of the criteria that Isabella has laid out for you. And there is a checklist that we're going to share with you. So don't worry about, oh, I didn't remember any of that stuff. We have a whole checklist for you. Then if you choose, please feel free to use one of your own notebooks or a notebook from your organization. You will need to have that exported to HTML in order to work with it. I will say if you don't have that in hand, I'd say go ahead and use one of the default notebooks. And then we also, just so in case you are interested in different kinds of astronomy topics or something a little different, we also provide links in the activity page that we're going to share with you right now to 2 other major space telescope projects that share a lot of Jupyter notebooks, and those are the Hello Universe project and the JDAT project. So those are 3 ways you can grab a notebook. And remember, if you're confused, if you're not sure, grab one of those default notebooks, okay? And then the second step is we're going to take a look at the checklist that is essentially, it's a lot of what you've heard from Isabella, and Isabella also created this checklist. It's a really great checklist. We're going to, I would say, don't go through the whole checklist. Pick an area that is of interest to you that you think might be relevant to this notebook, or that that just catches your interest, and such as text formatting, organization in terms of headers, image, alt text or descriptions, something like that, and focus on that in the kind of limited time we have together. And what you're doing is you're taking the notebook that you've chosen, and you're going to go through and evaluate it to see how it matches that area that you've chosen, that a smaller area of concern that you've chosen. And feel free to work with people in your room if you would like to collaborate, or to work independently. And then finally, we're going to, toward the end of our time together, we're going to transition over to, and we'll send a little broadcast message out so you'll know around when to transition. But we're going to transition over to discussing what we found, adding a couple of lines to the collaborative document, and then preparing to come back to the main group. And because we're going to have a very short discussion, about half an hour after we all come back together. And we've prepared a couple of questions for you, such as, what problem did you encounter, or accessibility consideration did you encounter most frequently? What surprised you the most? Don't feel worried if you didn't get to all the questions. Just pick out a question or 2 that you find most interesting, or, if you get to all, a little great too. And then if each group could choose a individual, it could be the facilitator if nobody's comfortable. But if each group could choose someone that they could be sort of called on to give an answer to, or to give some of the results from one of these questions in the discussion, that would be great. And I believe, Jen, you can correct me, but I think we're going to take our break now. We're going to set up the breakout rooms. It is currently 10:47. We're actually a little ahead of schedule, so I might suggest maybe an 8-minute break or something like that, Jen. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, can we just, I think there might be one more slide after this.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this is the breakout rooms, what you're describing.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so let's take an 8-minute break and let's come back right at 11 Eastern time. And then all the groups will be assigned by then.
Excellent. So 10:47. Yes, exactly.